And with the indulgence of the organizers, because we actually the session started about 15 to 20 minutes late. So with the indulgence of the organizers, I would like, we were supposed to finish the session by this time, but I would like to have some time for questions, and maybe we can have about 10 or 15 minutes of questions, and if you don't mind, a little bit late lunch. So I now open the floor for questions. Address to whom would you like?
Sure. Thank you, sir. This is Ansuman. I'm part of NIAS. My question is to Rahul. No, it is to the whole panel. The thing is, Rahul, very good presentation. And at the end, you said that so quickly things have, a lot of positive atmosphere has been created. Don't you think that Myanmar has paid a lot of price to come to this thing? And whatever the positivity you are seeing, what are the kind of, opportunities you are seeing is too little to sort of, to offer to the Myanmar kind of thing. And you rightly said that now that a lot of these ethnic groups are not part of the reconciliation process, how would you say that there's some sort of positivism is there in the air? Thank you.
I have a question to Dr. Sanjay. I'm here. I think it may look a bit naive, but given my limited knowledge on political science, but nevertheless I thought I should ask you this question. You have said repeatedly that the military has always been there to control insurgency. But I was wondering, why did not it support a popular government in 1990 and facilitate that government to control the insurgency? Was it just control insurgency or the hunger for power? And it wanted to have always been power. So that was the reason it continued to remain in power and did not want the popular government to be in place.
Thank you to all the presenters. I think this was a most interesting session with very interesting ideas being thrown up. And I think one of the important ideas that was thrown up was the center-periphery dichotomy and how Myanmar is going to deal with that. What is interesting about this is that there is on the one hand there is a center-periphery dichotomy. Myanmar also has this historical legacy of having the minorities on the periphery and the majority at the center. And this presents a dual dilemma before Myanmar. How to deal with this problem of having differences between the minority and the majority on the one hand and lack of development at the periphery. I think Dr. Rahul Mishra tried to address some of these issues by bringing in the stakeholders, and he has tried to address some of these problems which Myanmar is facing today. But I think we need to focus on what is the major issue before Myanmar today. Is it the ethnic problem or is it a political issue? I think perhaps the problem with Myanmar has been that it has not been able to address the crux of the problem, and the political leaders today in Myanmar have not been able to come out in the open and say that the ethnic problem is a major problem. And they have tried to evade, including Aung San Suu Kyi, have tried to evade the real issue at hand. And that perhaps is a major problem in Myanmar. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My question is for Mr. Pulipaka. Sir, we all are aware of Ms. Suu Kyi's stance on the Rohingya issue. I would like to know how are the Western countries reacting to her silence? And also, the beginning of this year or end of last year, I don't remember, but there were some reports of her party accepting election fund kind of things from crony capitalists who have come under sanctions from the Western countries. So, sir, could you throw some light on this? Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon. This question is for Dr. Sanjay. Sir, you said during your presentation that one of the compelling reasons for the Myanmar military, according to its own admission, is without their presence or without them being at the helm of affairs, the country would disintegrate because of the ethnic conflicts. I would like to know how far there is truth in this. In fact, not just considering the history of Myanmar itself, as well as the characteristics of the minorities and their isolation. And considering all these factors, both geographical, historical and ethnic factors, how far there is truth in this, especially if there were to be a civilian government. How will it be different compared to the military? What special reasons or capabilities of military, which it says, have made this possible, or have made this made them to climb this? In fact, thank you very much.
There is positivity about the democratic transition in Myanmar. I said that because of the fact that most of these reform issues, the reform agenda that has been set, is by the government, is more or less by Thein Sein. There is no role of the common people of Myanmar in it. So all that they've got is actually they've got in a platter. They're not, they didn't fight for it. I'm saying that they didn't fight for it because if you look at the transition from November 2010 on, there wasn't much, except the Chinese investment issue or the ethnic clashes between ethnic communities. People didn't protest, people didn't ask for much. So all that they've got is actually given to them without asking for it. And if you look at the transition itself, 2010 elections, we are seeing what is happening in West Asia. Most of the countries, there was a regime change and democratic transition, and in name of democracy, we are seeing what is happening there. And the international community has no role to play. So even from March 2011, had Thein Sein not done anything, I mean, rhetorically done a lot of things and not done anything on the ground, international community wouldn't have objected. And the people of Myanmar had to actually wait for another 4 years. So that's why I'm saying it. On the insurgency front, I think I agree with you that the insurgent groups, the rebel groups are not particularly happy about it. And they're not positive, certainly not positive about it. And we'll see the implications of that during the elections, how they respond to that. To Dr. Uday's question, well, sir, I agree with you that, that the leadership of Myanmar has not been able to resolve this issue. And this perhaps is the fundamental, you've actually kind of picked the most important issue that Myanmar policymakers are facing at this moment. So whether it is the ethnic minorities, the rebel groups, or the Rohingyas, both the groups, major groups, including President, have not been able to come out with clear, their ideas on it, their decisions on it, their policy statements on it. So this is one challenge that Myanmar is facing at this moment. And if they don't resolve it now, 5 years down the line, this is going to become even more difficult for them, to such an extent that they might have to, see a kind of division of, let's say, separatism in the country. So that's my take on it. You want to respond?
Well, I can say something on the same question. I think I don't have much to add because I think that's correct, and I think the problem with people like Dosu saying is that it's just not a priority for them. The ethnic issue is, and I don't think it will be a priority until it gets to the point that you just described, where it becomes such a big problem. Like the movements have gone from separatist ideas to more autonomy. If that goes back again to the way it was, then it becomes a bigger problem. Maybe they will get more attention in Naypyidaw. But until then, I don't think any of the big players that are also receiving attention internationally. This way, it's also not internationally made a priority. So yeah, I can't add more than that. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Regarding Anshuman's question, broadly, if you noticed, we have different approaches. I was looking more at it from a systems perspective. She was looking at who is there at the negotiation table and who is not in the stakeholders. And if you take Rahul, he's taking a decision makers, focusing on decision making approach. So therefore, we see a different kind of this thing. Whether it is positive, negative, is there an element of, yes, the Myanmar people have paid heavy price for where they are. Should they be satisfied? No. Should they throw up everything and express discontent? No. They have made significant progress in terms of at least opening up of political space. I remember going there in 2007 at a dinner table. People used to talk in hush-hush voices when they're talking about politics. Today it's much more on the street, which is a positive development in that sense. So it depends upon how you see democracy promotion. Do you see it as a spectacular event accompanied by some fireworks? Yes, no. If you take that approach, we will be disappointed. But if you take more of a what's that scholar's name? Stanford. I forgot his name. If you take a more of an incremental approach where you develop civil society organization, business communities, institutions, then Myanmar is making some progress. So it depends upon what kind of, whether you take an event-based approach or a developmental approach. These are two different things. In some countries, democracy will survive an event-based approach, where it is a spectacular event and it survives. But in Myanmar, that may not be the case. So therefore, I would go with Rahul saying that it's definitely a positive step so far that we have seen. And in terms of center-periphery dichotomy, one quick thing, Myanmar is going to have even more intense debate on this, because Professor Kudo's paper talks about how Mandalay and Yangon will emerge as major poles of economic growth, and if that is the case, Burma ethnic group, as a political scientist, in terms of ethnic politics, Burma ethnic group will benefit substantially from ethnic minorities. So there will be even more concentration of power. So far it is political power, now it will be accompanied by economic power of Burma ethnic community. So that's a political context, and we will look forward to his presentation tomorrow. And in terms of insurgency that Dr. Kannan and a couple of other people have asked me whether it is hunger for power or whether it is genuine. I'm not saying whether it is what I'm trying to understand how Myanmar came. I mean, it's standing where it is standing. Yes, there will be an element of hunger for power, but the question is, I am trying to unpack the discourse of Myanmar military and trying to see what are the various components of it. Myanmar, if you take Burma, I will use the word Burma, I don't have political connotations when I use Burma and Myanmar, I will use it interchangeably. During the civilian government, when General Neven was initially asked to take over power in 1958, around that time, he handed back power to civilian government. What is Myanmar military's major concern? Myanmar military's major concern has been that the civilian governments have promised more autonomy than it is required in terms of, say, a right to secede. And therefore they are constantly worried. When UNU came back to power after Neven handed over power, there was a concern in Myanmar military. Legitimate, not legitimate is a different issue. There was a concern that he was leaning more towards ethnic minorities. When Myanmar military was constituted, I mean, this is the history of that organization. It was constituted from the elements of British Army and also from the elements of Patriotic Burma Force, PBF. So PBF were substantially Burmese. The Burmese British Army was substantially ethnic minorities. So the Burmese officers were discriminated. That's the perception. Now Burma's army is substantially Burma ethnic group. So this complex politics results in that kind of language, and that is what I was trying to put in front of you. And In terms of Aung San Suu Kyi stance on Rohingya, yes, she has also pointed out a very important thing. See, this Rohingya issue should not also, or the Burmese government or the Myanmar government is very uncomfortable with that word. They call it illegal migrants. That issue is now, you are putting Aung San Suu Kyi on block. Whether we like it or not, it is no longer about Rohingyas or the illegal migrants or the boat people. It is a mechanism through which you are trying to put her on block. And inadvertently, if she speaks on it, she will lose her Burmese vote, and if she doesn't come to power, situation will be even worse tomorrow. So therefore, her silence may be strategic and pragmatic. So we need not be perturbed that she has given up completely on her democratic credentials. She has been talking about it in code language, if you noticed. She said in Washington Post interview very clearly, people are pushing me to, if you see the language, essentially she is saying is, this is an attempt to take me, asking me to take a stance on it. And the moment I take stance on this way or that way, there is going to be a lot of bloodshed. So the Western governments, there have been instances when people have expressed displeasure. If you are interested in Rohingyas or the migrant people, protecting their interests, the question is not whether to make Aung San Suu Kyi speak or not. Let us assume she speaks, situation does not improve. What's the point? You have a moral victory, but in terms of real politics, you may have lost it. So that's dimensions that need to be kept in mind, especially during an election season when rhetoric, all kinds of rhetoric gets circulated. So those are some of the issues. On corny capitalists taking money, I haven't gone through the list of that specific news item. That's a challenge. Democracy is exceptionally costly, trust me, it requires funding. And when we talk of political transitions, or even in our own country, we don't talk of state funding. Now, in a country like Burma, where it is going through political transition, where military has substantial resources at its disposal, Aung San Suu Kyi has to raise funds to fight elections in some form or the other. How will she raise it? That's a challenge. And she may make mistakes. I'm not saying she may not make mistakes. But the question is, without state funding, even in countries like India, how can you have clean politics? Hobnobbing with some capitalists will take place. That doesn't mean that the people who are doing it are bad people. That's the nature of politics across countries that is happening. Tragic, but that's how it is.
Thank you very much. Also, I see that there are still some more questions. I think we have run out of time, and the organizers would really like to end this session. But before ending, I think we should all give a round of applause for the three very good presentations.
Very beautifully, and he should be given a round of applause for that also.